being a highly functioning person meant I was stuffing it all down and suppressing everything. And it got to a point where that made me physically unwell. And there was a point where my physical health and my mental health and emotional health just all clashed together. And there was literally no escape at that point.
Yeah.
And I was in a really, really dark place and a really low place and didn't have the health and the resilience and the vibrancy to just keep myself going. There was no escape. So it was a really difficult time, and I just did not see past that point. I did not see past the point of feeling healthy again, of getting better. And I think all that suppressed trauma and emotions all coming out at once just makes it feel so overwhelming and so
Right.
unmanageable.
Welcome to the You Are Not Your Trauma podcast, a show that reminds you that you are not alone, your experiences matter, and you are not defined by what you've been through. Each week, you will hear from the host and invited guests who have either personal or professional experience with trauma. They will share their stories and strategies for overcoming past wounds and beginning the journey toward healing and wholeness. Now, here's your host, a gifted speaker, author, coach, and entrepreneur, Harriet M. Harris.
Welcome to a brand new episode of You Are Not Your Trauma, the podcast that brings hope, healing, and inspiration to those who have experienced life's most challenging moments. I'm your host, Harriet M. Harris, and I am so glad that you're here today. I hope that this show is an important part of your healing journey. Now, when you think of the metamorphosis of a butterfly, what generally comes to mind? I'm guessing transformation, new beginnings, and the breathtaking beauty of emerging stronger and more vibrant. That, my friends, is the beauty of emerging from our past. I mean, imagine breaking free from the cocoon of our past traumas, stretching our wings and discovering the colors of healing and strength that we never knew we had. Today, we will explore the dance between mind and body and how, like a butterfly, we can rise above and truly transform. So get ready for an episode filled with hope, growth, and this symbolic rebirth of self. This is going to be so enlightening. Now, today's episode is all about exploring how we deal with trauma and how alternative approaches like somatic therapy can be game changers in rebuilding ourselves. I hope you're ready because we've got a story of personal transformation, an insight into somatic therapy, and a discussion on how this can impact community healing and empowerment. Now, let me introduce you to our amazing guest today, Abbie Westgate. Abbie is a police officer and trauma-informed coach who uses her personal experience of trauma and recovery to help others. Abbie's story is one of resilience, of turning struggles into strength and making healing accessible through somatic therapy, especially for other police officers. Abbie, it is so great to have you here. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Harriet. It's so great to be here, and thank you for such a lovely introduction.
Absolutely. Well, Abbie, let's start with you telling us a bit about you and what you do.
So, as you already said in the introduction, I'm a serving police officer in the UK, and I use my experiences, my personal experience of trauma, to become a coach and use what I learned in my own journey to help and support others in that same process. And the coaching has a really trauma-informed approach. And within that, I'm helping clients to get their life into alignment. And that comes from working on that unprocessed trauma, those unprocessed emotions and unprocessed experiences that we have that get in the way of our lives. And in doing so, it's really helping them to clear the path and helping them find their voice, helping them to unleash their true inner gifts and find their purpose and unlock that purpose within.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, Abbie, I am excited to learn more really just learn more about somatic therapy. I think this is going to be a treat for myself and for our listeners. But before we get deep into learning more, we're going to take a very quick commercial break, and we will be right back.
Want a chance to win exclusive You Are Not Your Trauma merch? Here's how. Leave a rating and a review on your favorite podcast platform and share your thoughts with us. It helps us reach more listeners who may also be seeking healing and growth. Once you left your feedback, visit feedback.youarenotyourtrauma.com to let us know you've entered by entering your info and the word feedback in the message section. You could be a lucky winner. Now stay tuned for today's inspiring episode, and thank you for being a part of the You Are Not Your Trauma community.
Okay, we are back. So, Abbie, you were just sharing with us a little bit about you and what you do. So, you're a police officer in the UK, and you're a trauma-informed coach. So, tell us a little bit how those two kind of work together.
So I initially started my coaching practice supporting people that weren't in the police. And then that led to me merging the two together and thinking, how can I actually bring this into my working environment to help and support my colleagues who will also be facing a lot of trauma? And it's kind of started going from there. And when I started to share this knowledge within the police force, they were really interested in knowing about how somatic therapy can be used by other police officers to support them in their health, their well-being, and just in their day-to-day lives, with emotional intelligence and resilience, health, welfare, and resilience.
Wow, that is amazing. So, Abbie, you mentioned in your sorry, I didn't know. So, Abbie, I'd like to discuss the goodbye letter. Is that okay with you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us what led you to that point?
So if I could rewind back to, childhood, I've been through a lot of experiences in childhood, had quite a painful childhood. I've experienced a lot of different types of abuse in terms of physical and emotional and neglect. And I had quite a challenging teenage years as well and a younger life. But I suppose I didn't know any different, and they were things that I'd kind of just carried on my shoulders for a long time, but managed to get through life. And I was doing really well. And whilst I had this unprocessed trauma, I was very highly functioning with it. So I never really had to address it too much. And it was only when I got to a point in my life, and it was around about 2014, and it literally felt like someone set fire to my life. That's kind of how it felt at the time. It started with the loss of a friend who committed suicide, and it then followed by the death of another friend who died of natural causes, but it was a sudden death. And then the death of my mother, which was a sudden death, and that led to my relationship. I was due to get married, and that broke down as a result of the trauma. That then impacted my future relationships. I had a relationship in a working environment, and that impacted my working environment when that ended. So it just felt like it was one thing after another, building up. And being a highly functioning person meant I was stuffing it all down and suppressing everything. And it got to a point where that made me physically unwell. And there was a point where my physical health and my mental health and emotional health just all clashed together. And there was literally no escape at that point. And I was in a really, really dark place and a really low place, and didn't have the health and the resilience and the vibrancy to just keep myself going. There was no escape. So it was a really difficult time, and I just did not see past that point. I did not see past the point of feeling healthy again, of getting better. And I think all that suppressed trauma and emotions all coming out at once just makes it feel so overwhelming and so unmanageable. And yeah, I just thought, I don't want to be here anymore. This is too much. And I think this is my time. I think that was the underlying feeling, like, this is my time. I can't go through like any more of this that's happening.
Okay. And so when you were writing that goodbye letter, right, there was a pivotal moment there for you that you mentioned. What went through your mind, and how did that really shift and change your healing journey?
So ironically, going to write the letter was the thing that was the shift, because when I started
Okay.
to try and write a goodbye letter, I realized I had
Mhm.
absolutely nothing to say, and that hit me in the face. I was like, all this experience and all this life and everything
Mhm.
that I've been through, and my life is literally a blank page.
Wow.
That really, really hit me quite hard. It was a cold light of day moment. And there was absolutely no way that I would go without leaving a goodbye letter to my family. So, especially having experienced losing someone to suicide and they didn't leave a note, that was super, super painful. There was no way I could do that, but I also couldn't just leave a blank page, and I didn't want my life to reflect a blank page. And at that moment, it was a really different chain of events that happened. I made a decision, like, if you're going to stay, like, you were going to heal, and you were going to heal properly this time. And it was just
Right,
a
right.
very, very like pinnacle moment really in my healing and in my journey.
So realizing that there was nothing to write was the moment. That was the change, because you realized maybe that your story wasn't finished.
Yeah, my story wasn't finished, and also I wanted there to be something like a legacy, and I wanted to contribute, and I wanted there to
Mm,
be something, an inspiration. In that letter, I was looking to leave some comfort and, really beautiful words for my family, but there was nothing, and I just wanted the complete opposite of that. I wanted my life to mean and represent something. So almost in the face of death was where I actually found life.
mhm. Wow. In the face of death, you found life. Wow. I think that's a very beautiful moment. And you said that that was kind of what the shift for you. So you mentioned somatic healing or somatic therapy. How did you first come across that? How did you um like how did you decide that this was what was going to work for you versus more traditional therapy?
So up until this time in my life, after the goodbye letter, I'd never heard of somatic therapy at all. It just wasn't on my radar. And when I made that decision that I'm going to finally heal, I'm going to look after myself, that initially started with self-care. And
Mm,
I had an app on my phone, and there was yoga videos and meditation, and there was something on there called breathwork. I was really familiar with meditation, but I'd never tried breathwork. So within that self-care, for getting myself back up to a place of health and well-being, I tried breathwork for the first time, and it absolutely blew my mind in that I had this release of trauma, and I'd never experienced anything like that before. And I've tried therapy before, I've tried different types of healing before, and this was different. It completely blew my mind. It was just this release of trauma, and it was so tangible, and it was a physically, you could physically feel it. I could feel the difference in myself after that. And that's what really kind of brought me into the somatic world, and I started to research it. I was just so fascinated by it, and I wanted to know more. And that really kind of opened my mind, and it's just gone from there really, and I've never ever looked back. I've just gone more into the topic.
so if you would say maybe a top difference between the traditional healing method and the somatic therapy, what would you say is like the part that won you over?
So I've experienced therapy as talk
Mm-hmm.
and therapy, and that has always been the primary therapy that's been offered, that's been available.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, it's where you go and you talk about your experiences. And it was
Absolutely.
very distressing. It was really distressing and used to make me
Mm-hmm.
feel worse. I used to come away thinking I'm broken, and I would be in crisis point. So I started to avoid therapy and just had this opinion that actually I'm never going to get better. But I
Wow.
learned within my exploration of somatic therapy. I read a brilliant book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it explains that actually in the phase of trauma, even just someone being read their experience shuts the left side of the brain down. The left hemisphere of the brain, an area called the Broca's area, is the speech center of the brain. So it totally made sense why that would happen. And it no longer made sense to me that I would use talk and therapy as a primary method to heal, when actually my body and neuroscience was dictating that the left side of my brain, the left hemisphere of my brain, the speech center, would be shutting down. And that's why talking about my experiences was so difficult, because the right side, the emotional side, comes on, and that was taken over. And that's what I was experiencing over and over again. And that's why I was feeling broken. And then I had this somatic journey, which taught me actually you can heal from the body. It's more intelligent, it's more efficient, and you don't even have to start speaking about your experiences. It's bottom up instead of top down.
Wow, that's really interesting. As someone who is still on a healing journey, it's something I definitely have to look into. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that book, because it's been on my list. And I actually just opened it this past week to begin reading it. So I think I have a lot to learn there.
Yeah, that is a really great book. And I love a quote from that book. And it talks about trauma not just being an event that happened sometime in the past. It's the imprint of that experience leaves on the mind, the brain, and the body, and which is a really fundamental part of the somatic therapy and the coaching work that I do. It's not working necessarily with the trauma, but the imprint part and the way that it impacts your life going forwards.
Okay. That's very interesting. So Abbie, can you share some specific ways in which somatic healing has transformed your life, especially in relation to processing your childhood trauma and grief?
So the first thing that I learned, the first tool that has really supported this process for me, was polyvagal theory, which is nervous system regulation work. It's the work of Dr. Stephen Porges. And up until coming into somatic therapy and nervous system work, I was very reactive in terms of trauma. So I was just responding to triggers, and I was living in this very reactive place. And that was where I was making my decisions from, and all my actions were dictated from in day-to-day life. But switching over to the somatic experience and the nervous system work meant that actually I could calm that reactivity. And from that, I was able to look within and start finding out actually what were the problems within and the issues within that I needed to work on, linking back to my trauma, my childhood, linking back to the attachment system and my relationships. And because I didn't have that reaction that was, constantly dictating my behaviors and my responses, it meant I could just finally start doing that deep inner work that led to healing. And I'm now in a place where I've completely healed all those parts of my childhood that I was carrying around for years. I'm completely clear with it.
Wow, that's amazing. So, you said it was the nervous system regulation work, right? That was you said the first tool, and that allowed you to get to a point where you were able to completely heal from those past traumas.
Yeah, it enabled me to just calm my system down so that I can actually do that inner healing work. Whereas before it was too distressing, just like going back to the talking therapy aspect, where just talking about those things would trigger me and make me very distressed. It was like calming that trigger reaction. So actually go within and work through my trauma and work through my experiences, but from a place of calm instead of fight or flight and looking for safety.
So you still did the work. That's what I'm hearing. You still did the work.
Yeah.
But it just didn't, using this method allowed you to do the work in a way that wasn't stressful for you, and you were able to kind of work through things in a more peaceful manner. Is that okay? That's
a really important point that you make, that it isn't a nice way that you bypass the work. I did the work and it was hard. It was hard for a long time, and I went right into every single experience time and time again, and processed and regulated and worked through blocks, and I did that time after time after time. But this nervous system regulation tool was the foundation that allowed me to get into those parts of myself and actually do the inner work. Because before that, I was only just working on the layer of reacting to my trauma, not actually processing and understanding.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you. Yeah. And I'm glad you cleared that up, because what I wanted our listeners to know that, this isn't a way to bypass the hard part of it. Doing the work is the hard part of, but I appreciate you sharing how it just allowed you to do it in a different headspace, in a different way, in a way that wasn't making you miserable and causing more pain.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, you mentioned, I know you're a police officer in the UK, and when you talk about, bringing this somatic therapy into law enforcement. So with the high stress nature of police work and the prevalence of trauma, how do you envision somatic therapy making a difference within the police force?
Well, it's a great personal tool that absolutely anybody with a nervous system or a body can use. So that's going to be absolutely everyone. And being able to go into stressful situations and have that internal self-awareness and emotional intelligence and the ability to regulate, to recognize when you're in a stressful situation and regulate back to a calm place, or when you're in a shutdown place, like a freeze, to be able to bring yourself back around. That's what creates true resilience. And that's what we want from the law enforcement and police officers. We want resilient people. And resilience doesn't just mean shut down people. It's people with really good people skills, with the ability to still be human with us all when we're going through probably some really challenging experiences. We want them to be human, resilient, and emotionally intelligent. And these are the tools that really helps everybody to use that.
So how, and I know you're in the UK, so it's, I'm sure it's different than in the US, but as far as how the police force works, but how open are the police officers to this type of therapy where you are?
So I would say it's something that's incredibly new for them. Like this hasn't been introduced, but we have reached a point where we're talking to people about the nervous system and fight or flight in training school. But I think that's probably like universally recognized, like we all recognize the stress response. So I usually explain it as just an add-on to the stress response. It's the same part of the nervous system and it's the same reaction. And from that, there's a lot of people that are open to actually looking and to seeing how this can support them deeper. But I will say it's from me sharing my own experiences so openly that's starting to get more people interested. So I think there has to be kind of an element of vulnerability and for me saying, hey, like this has worked for me. Let me tell you about my experience, and that's what gets people interested, and especially the people who can see the change in me, like the people who see the before me when I was a traumatized person, but I was a traumatized person until I wasn't, and people can notice that, they can see that, and they're like, what are you doing?
And being able to share that experience is what's kind of driving those conversations. So as far as the work that you're doing within the police force, is it more something kind of top down directed, or is it more amongst your peers?
So I'm currently in the process of mapping out how this is actually going to look and how that's going to fit into the police force. But the view at present is that it's going to be amongst peers and delivering it to small groups in a training day. So a very personal setting, one-to-one with police officers. And I think that's going to be really beneficial because
Mhm.
the police officers trust the voice of another police officer. And
Yeah.
I'm coming in and saying, like, this is my experience, talking very openly, very vulnerably, but also very confidently. Like, I have utmost faith and belief in what I'm teaching you here and
Right,
these skills
right.
and tools. So yeah, it's going to be within a personal setting for now, and I suppose from there it'll just grow quite organically and naturally in whichever direction it's meant to.
That's amazing. Like that is amazing that is a tool that you're being allowed to incorporate into the lives of your coworkers. Not just because most importantly for them, because I mean, I can't imagine the amount of things that a police officer sees, like the amount of other people's stuff, not to mention what they would go through personally, but just the amount of experiences that they come across in the work that they do. So kudos to you for being vulnerable enough to be open and discuss it with your coworkers and create a safe space for them to be able to learn more about your personal experiences. I love that.
Thank you.
So, Abbie, looking ahead, how do you see somatic therapy playing a role in a broader community healing and empowerment? What's your vision for the future, and how can this method of healing help more people?
I think the great thing about somatic experience and somatic therapy is that it's a scientific theory, it's not a therapeutic intervention. Therefore, it's available for absolutely anyone to use and to use in a way that suits them, it's fit for them, right? There's no one size fits all with somatic therapy. And it can really help people develop a more intentional, more self-aware relationship with themselves and with their bodies. And in doing that, I know from my personal experience, it's meant I have a lot more self-awareness into the experiences I'm going into, and therefore it's created resilience for me so that actually it's almost like a future-proofing for trauma. Going into experiences in the future, I would approach completely different. It doesn't mean I'm bypassing them. It just means I know how to absolutely look after myself in the best
Right.
way to stop that imprint that I was talking about earlier from doing what it did before, where I felt like my life was completely set on fire. It was only at the absolute crisis point that I make change. It takes me back like 10 steps and is able to take action and process and understand my experiences at a much earlier stage, so they're not getting to the point of crisis, which, like I say, it's resilience.
Wow. Okay. So I mean, I'm not saying that I'm aware of all therapies, but somatic therapy is one that I've not heard very much at all about. Why do you think that it's not a lot of awareness about somatic healing or somatic therapy?
So I know within the UK, the token therapies are something, I suppose, that just are the primary. It's the primary therapy that's offered from the medical world. And as I mentioned before, the somatic therapy isn't necessarily a therapeutic intervention, it's more scientific theory. So I think we tend to, go to the doctor with our physical and mental health troubles, and that is their natural go-to. It's within the guidelines, it's within their treatment pathways and their triage. And therefore, I think it's just that's what we know. Like, it's what we know and what we've done before. So we continue to do that. And only now we're starting to realize the power of these other types of therapies. And it's through things like breath work and nervous system work that it's really starting to come alive and come to life for people and become available. And people are looking for that holistic view of their health now. And I think that's why we're only just hearing about this now.
Okay. Well, I found it very intriguing. So this is definitely something that I'll be looking more into. And hopefully our listeners will be kind of digging into that a little bit more as well, just to learn more about it. Because like you said, primarily, I think even in the US, what is offered is talk therapy. That's what people are most comfortable with. Well, even the people that aren't comfortable with it, that's what is most widely known. And then those that do it, that's generally where they begin. And then they kind of, expand off to other things. So it's always nice to learn something new. That's kind of how I feel. That's why when you mentioned this topic, I was like, oh, this is great, because this gives us another layer of learning, another opportunity to learn something different that helps with our healing journey. So thank you for sharing this. So we are going to take another quick commercial break, and we will be back.
We are on an incredible journey together, sharing stories of resilience, hope, and the power of healing. To extend the reach and impact of the You Are Not Your Trauma movement, we've launched the Give 5 to Change Lives campaign. With just $5, you can contribute to developing invaluable resources like our upcoming You Are Not Your Trauma app, healing journal, and expanded podcast content. Every dollar and every share contributes to helping bring healing and hope to more people. We invite you to join this movement. Visit giving.youarenotyourtrauma.com to contribute. Together, we can change lives one heart at a time.
Okay, we are back. Abbie, I just want to say that your story is nothing short of inspiring, showing us the true power of the human spirit and how transformative somatic therapy can be. That's just, I really enjoyed it. Like, I'm really glad that you were able to share this with us and willing. Your efforts to bring this therapy to more people and your vision for the future are truly uplifting. So thank you so much for opening up and sharing today.
Thank you for having me. The pleasure is all mine. It's been great to share and just to spread the message and the word further.
Well, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Just before we go, I thought it would just be useful to give an example of actually how the somatic therapy has benefited me in action and just how it actually impacts my life. Now I've gone through all the hard work. And just with a live example, I know I've mentioned my friend who passed away from suicide. And I had a thought about that the other week, and the cognitive experience, like the initial thought was like, oh, okay, like whilst I'll always deeply miss my friend, like the grief, that intense grief isn't there anymore. So that was my first thought. However, because of the somatic awareness I've gained, I actually realized then in my body, I was really breathless. It was almost like my breath had been taken away, and I was really tense around my chest, and my heart was actually beating really quite fast. So that actually showed me I was still in a stress response, which is my development with that somatic relationship with my body taught me actually you're in a stress response. So from that, I was able to regulate, I was able to sit and regulate and work through that emotion as it arose in my day. And from that, I was able to process and get on with my day. But if I looked back to before I had the somatic therapy, the somatic experience and the nervous system work, I would have completely just gone with that first thought in my head, that cognitive thought of, okay, so I don't feel this intense experience of grief. I would have still had those physical reactions, that really intense stress response. And what would have happened is that anxiety would have just been below the system. And I would have, at some point later in my day, I've suddenly felt really anxious because it's gone from probably like a 2 or a 3 to an 8. And it's only at the 8 out of 10 where I'm noticing it. But I wouldn't be able to link it back to anything in particular. So I just think I'm suddenly this anxious person. What's going on? I'm broken. Where did this anxiety come from? And so that just really highlights the value of this work and how you can just really be in your day-to-day experience and be able to understand and process your emotions instead of feel like they're just happening to you. And that was just a story that I really want to share just to finish off the conversation.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that was a very good example. I think that's something that actually kind of ties it all together from everything that you shared, that specific example. So again, thank you. Thank you for the vulnerability. Thank you for sharing your story. As we wrap up today's conversation, I want you all the listeners to just think about this. In life's dance, it's not about the fails, but about the leaps we make after getting up. Transformation is all about rising every time we fall. So just know that as we are going through our healing journeys, going through that process of working through our traumas, working through those bad experiences, it's okay to have them. It's okay to have those moments, but learning to get up and just keep going forward, just very similar to what Abbie mentioned. That's what's important. So to everyone out there, all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of You Are Not Your Trauma podcast. Now, I want y'all to join the conversation. I want you to think about a time when something just clicked, a turning point. How did that moment change you? I want you to share your stories on social media with the hashtag Transforming Trauma Stories, and be sure to tag us at You Are Not Your Trauma podcast. Let's create a wave of support and learn from each other's experiences, because really that's what it's all about. Just like Abbie is here sharing her experiences, just as many of our guests have before. So if you found today's episode helpful, please don't forget to share it with someone who can benefit from the information shared. Also, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. You can check out the website, www.youarenotyourtrauma.com, to leave feedback, request to be a guest on the show, subscribe to the show, get information on our show guests, or to get information about advertising on You Are Not Your Trauma podcast. You can connect with You Are Not Your Trauma podcast on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at You Are Not Your Trauma podcast. And if you have a story to share, please email me at contact@harrietmharris.com. Until next time, always remember, you're not defined by your trauma. You're defined by how you overcome it. I'll catch y'all next time. And until then, keep growing, keep exploring, and keep healing.